And our third speaker today is Michelle Pasterick from the Pennsylvania State University, and she'll be discussing mediating pre-service teachers' development of intercultural competence during study abroad. Welcome.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I'm here to talk about my dissertation research and project that is now in very frantic writing stage, basically. What I'm talking about is Language Learning Abroad, which is the name of a course that I teach for world language education majors who are studying abroad. So this just gives a general idea of what I'm going to talk about, my conceptualization of intercultural competence, the idea of mediation and what I mean by that and how it works, and then some of the things that I've seen specific to my project. So we're all here these couple of days to talk about intercultural competence. So the way that I conceptualize it is more along the lines of Byram, and we saw this earlier actually in Joan's talk, the exact same, actually later on, the exact same definition, but really it involves critical and analytical understanding of your own culture and of other cultures that you interact with, and that you're conscious of your own perspective, and that your thinking is culturally determined and it's not natural. Your way isn't the way, and someone else's is different, but that we all have our own. Bennett, and Allen also say that it's the ability to relate effectively and appropriately in a variety of cultural contexts. We can argue about what effective and appropriate are, but I would just say it's basically you can accomplish something in a language without offending somebody. Pretty much, you know, that's what we can do with it. And also, Scarina talks about what the goal of the development of intercultural competence is, which is extending and elaborating, in this case, students' interpretive frames, their frames of reference, through reflecting upon communication in different and complex intercultural contexts, whether that's abroad or at home. So I'm looking specifically at intercultural competence and world languages education. Serku, as actually was mentioned in a talk earlier, has a really great book. I think actually, Paula, it was you, right, that mentioned it. And very first thing, page 1, it should be obvious to all of us, I hope, here at the conference. But foreign language education is, by definition, intercultural. It connects learners to a world that's culturally different from their own, and linguistically different, of course. It also is something that's important within the ACTFL standards. And they actually say that through the study of language, students gain knowledge and understanding of other cultures, and go so far as to say that students can't actually master the language until they've mastered the cultural contexts in which the language occurs. I'm not sure about that word mastered there, but basically that those two things must go together in world languages education. And I use world languages instead of foreign language education, just FYI. And coming back to Byram again, he talks about the fact that communication is dependent not only on those linguistic elements, not just on that language, or I can conjugate this verb or I know this subject, but it's really dependent on understanding how what you say or write will be perceived and interpreted by someone else in another cultural context. So again, it's not just that language, but it's how those things all are perceived and understood in different contexts. So then I'm looking at teachers, world languages teachers, and the development of ICC. And I should point out that the teachers that I work with are going to be K through 12 teachers. So I'm talking at that level. And in Pennsylvania, world languages, the educational certificate is actually a K through 12 certificate. So they are certified to teach all of the grades. So basically, the point is that for learners to develop ICC, so high school, middle school, even elementary school, learners of language to develop intercultural competence, the teachers have to have the appropriate knowledge and understanding in order to be able to help them towards that. But a lot of research is showing that it's just not really the case. It's not something that's emphasized in teacher education programs. And some of the research is there. Bennett, and Allen did some work with this as well, and they found that teachers actually feel unprepared or even afraid sometimes to teach culture or intercultural competence because they just have no model for teaching it themselves. They haven't been taught it, they haven't experienced it, and so they just don't even know what to do. And so, when we don't know about something, it's a lot more difficult for us to step out and say, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And then in 2009, Byron was really looking specifically at ICC in world language education. And he says that as teachers, we intend to include a cultural dimension, but it's often intermittent or kind of unplanned, which can be attributed to this lack of attention to the cultural dimension in teacher training. And so that's something that I am basically out to try to not save the world, but do a little part in my own little piece of the world, basically. So one of the sites, of course, where students of any major, anybody really, can work to develop intercultural competence is through study abroad. It's really a pretty natural site for development. A lot of us here do work, and a lot of us are talking about study abroad, of course, because it's natural because we have sustained contact with members of another culture, exposure to its practices, involvement in its activities, whether that's going and buying bread or riding the bus or anything like that. Of course, I want to point out that study abroad is absolutely not the only site in which to develop intercultural competence. It can be done in the classroom as well, here in the States or in your own context. So it's a great site, but there's always a but. It's become really clear, and also I've heard other people talking about it so far, that it's not magic. Going abroad, studying abroad isn't magic for your language and isn't magic for your cultural development. De Keyser says there's no magical implicit learning process that takes place. We don't get abroad and suddenly, boom, okay, I can figure out how to interact with these people that I've never met in my life and have never been exposed to. And Crumsch actually says it even stems from who we are when we are at home. She says students really don't have any systematic knowledge of themselves as members of a given society or culture. Our own culture is invisible to us. We don't really look at that and analyze it. And so they don't have that, and they don't have enough knowledge about the target culture in order to be able to interpret or synthesize all of these things that they're experiencing as they are abroad. Excuse me. And Byron as well says that study abroad is good, but that it doesn't necessarily lead to learning unless it's related to the reflection and analysis of the classroom. And he doesn't just mean traditional classroom, like sitting at the desk. But so this idea of reflection and analysis is really what my study, my focus, my project has focused on. And in talking about this idea of reflection and study abroad, Jackson notes that by doing this, they're sort of revisiting the experiences that they're having. They don't just experience it once, but they come back to it and they think through it and they experience it again, and they become more aware of being in the world and being aware of their own responses in intercultural encounters. They're actually thinking through, well, what did I do, and why did I do that, and why did the other person react this way, and so on. So coming back again to the idea of teacher education, which is my field. Either in study abroad or in traditional courses in classroom settings, if pre-service teachers, as I said, are to be situated to help their own future students develop intercultural competence, they need to gain explicit awareness of culture, their own culture and others, and they also need to be helped in approaching cultural interactions reflectively and analytically, going back to reflection and analysis. And the be helped, that part, is the next really key element of what I try to do in my work. And so that is mediation. Excuse me. So I define mediation, I'm using the definition of mediation. Oh, thank you. Excuse me. As the social process through which learners are guided towards the ability to understand and transform their own thinking. And it's transformation that's really key in this process. So through mediation, students or anybody has a reorientation of their understanding and their acting in the world. So not only do they start to think differently, they start to act differently as well. And I'm coming from the theoretical framework of Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. And he says that the mind is always and everywhere mediated, whether that involves dialogic interaction with somebody, which is social mediation, or by the use of physical or symbolic tools, a hammer, a cane, a chart, a number system, all of those things. We're always mediated by other things in our minds. And Wirtz says that these things co-occur as we engage in activities with others. Really, this social aspect is really, really important. So the role of a mediator, teacher, educator, facilitator, is really important in reflection and dialogue, in students' reflection and dialogue. And the emphasis should be their own participation in that dialogue and guiding the students towards particular ways of thinking or rethinking or understanding. So that's kind of the background of where I'm coming from and all this, the short version. So here's my project. This is a course that I developed, I helped develop for, as I said, world languages education majors, and it's concurrent with their mandatory study abroad semester. And this course is also now mandatory within their program. Over the last couple of years, we went through the big bureaucratic process and got it added to the things that they need to participate in. So far, all of our students have been in Western Europe and Central and South American countries, basically. The majority of the world languages students are Spanish, French, and German speaking. So they go to Spanish, French, and German speaking countries. We're starting to get Chinese, but the system doesn't exist for certification yet, really, in Chinese in Pennsylvania. So that's something that will happen down the road. So because students are all spread out across the world, it's not like we can meet there, or I can't spend entire semesters, or I can't even spend the semester traveling around to each place. I wish I could. There's definitely not funding for that. So the course is blog and Skype based, and I'll give some more details on that. So some of the elements that the students do in the course, or that I do with the students, sometimes they have readings, sometimes, well, always, there are blog responses blog prompts that they are responding to and they post. They do this for 12 weeks of their program. So the first 2 weeks they're there, they don't have anything to do with our course, so they get to kind of start to figure things out a little bit. And then in week 3, we start them in the course, but it's really just, hey, how was your arrival? Did you get there on time? Did you have any plane issues? Those kinds of things. And then weekly after that, there are different prompts that they respond to. Another aspect is what I call a blog conversation. So a student will post something, a classmate responds to them, and I assign who responds to who when, just so that everybody gets the chance. I know for sure everybody will be responded to and responding, and that they have the chance to interact with all different classmates throughout their time. So they respond to each other, I respond to them, and then they respond back to both me and their classmate. So it's really dialogic in what we're asking them to do. The last words are their response back to us. There are also inquiry activities that they do. One's a participant observation. One is a linguistic landscape. If you heard Joan's talk this morning, she talked a little bit about that, using signs in their host cultures. And they do an interview with a native speaker as well. And then twice during the semester, they video conference through Skype with me, and I record that. And I kind of ask them how things are going, but I also have a set of questions that I ask all of the students, just so things are a little bit similar, but not completely. I want to show you really quickly what the course calendar looks like. So you can just have an idea of these are the things, and they're sort of organized around these conceptual ideas. Basically, they're getting a beginning awareness, then they're thinking about language as negotiated activity, So we're talking about things like culture shock, cross-cultural miscommunication. There's some projects that they have to do, go out and talk with native speakers, or just go out and observe an everyday communicative event. Perceptions, different kinds of perceptions, gender and culture, which is a big thing, identity, and thinking about the impact of all of this on their own teaching as well. So that just gives a little bit of an idea of what they're asked to do. Down through. So really, we wanted to sort of avoid that black hole that Aguilar Stewart talks about, where students go abroad and we just lose contact with them. We have no idea what they're doing, what's going on, are they making any connections, are they learning anything, are they talking to anybody? So that was one of the main things. Also, in order to be able to provide that mediation, because again, as I said before, we just can't assume that they go abroad and suddenly they just get it all, and they have lots of linguistic and cultural learning. And then facilitating their collective discussions and reflections, and also encouraging them to engage with members of the target culture. There are lots of requirements for them to do that, and they may or may not have done that. Just like Rachel said, maybe they would have sat and watched TV if you hadn't said, you have to talk. Kind of similar to what we wanted. This is just a sample of a blog prompt. Every prompts are different every week depending on whether I've asked them to do a reading and then respond, or just give their own thoughts about something. So they've read Tannen's piece about the pragmatics of cross-cultural communication, an oldie but a goodie there. And so I've asked them, okay, so take into account this reading that you've just done, and then talk about your own experience in relation to that reading. So you've got this sort of abstract notion of the reading and applying it to the everyday experience that they're having there. So thinking about, okay, tell us about this event, what happened initially, why did you think you had this miscommunication? Now that you've read this reading, what do you think might actually have been at the root of the issue? They're really good at figuring this out. I'm always really impressed. They're like, oh, okay, I can really see now that this issue might have been caused by the fact that I don't know when to talk or when not to talk. And then I asked them also to think about how they're going to do things differently as they move forward. So it's that reorientation again of their thinking and of their behavior. Okay. So there's lots of different ways. One of the things that I wanted to know was basically what kind of mediation happens, right? And it's really important to note that I am not the only one that's mediating, right? As the facilitator of the course, every single thing in that course mediates the students. The readings do, the prompts do, the classmates, they mediate each other a lot. It's really impressive, and the activities. So we're sort of looking at the whole thing as a dialogue. There's foundations, initial contributions, contributing, and then I am strategically mediating their dialogue. I'm asking them certain things for certain purposes always, basically. And they actually start to pick up on that, and they'll start to do it to each other as well, because they know I'm going to do it, so they just do it. They'll just say, oh wait, but did you think more deeply about that in the culture? Why is that? Go out and find somebody that can tell you about this, which actually is really fascinating. That's its own paper, I'm sure. So the readings and the activities, they're mediating their relation to the target culture, and I'm trying to mediate, trying to help them connect their lived experiences with the abstract notions that are presented, as I mentioned. But sometimes all of this mediation is more successful than other times, which of course shouldn't come as a surprise to us as teachers, right? We're more successful than others a lot of times. And some students are more, as Vygotsky would say, ripe for mediation, meaning they're ready to take this feedback that they're getting and they're ready to kind of think about it themselves and maybe run with it. And some students just aren't really that ripe for it. They're not ready for it for lots of different reasons. So I've taken the approach in my dissertation of looking at a couple of case studies for my research. I could write a case study on every student that I've ever had in the course, but that's just not feasible as well. But every single time, so right now is the 4th time that we've offered the course. Every single time it has emerged that there are some students who really, really can accept the mediation and can go really far on the path towards developing ICC in ways of analyzing and reflecting, and some they just don't get there, no matter how much I try to get them to think about different things. And I know there's lots of different reasons for that. That's not what I'm looking at in my research, although it could be a future, something to look at in the future. But it might have to do with their own personalities or their own backgrounds or different experiences they have while they're abroad, whether that's positive or negative. So 2 case studies that I'm looking at are Michael and Samantha, not the same Samantha, of course, as Rachel's. So Michael was one of the students who was really, really ripe for mediation. And I saw him really go from thinking of things kind of emotionally at first and then going and in the end really being analytical. I have to say he did start out more analytical than some of them as well. But one of the ways his ripeness shows is in that analysis that he's able to do. So he says, I think I came to Austria with that old-fashioned Sound of Music idealized version in my mind. So right away he's thinking about his own self. He's self-analyzing. He says, of course, things are quite modern right now. And he actually says that was hard for him to get used to. He says that in a separate place in this post. For a while, I was nervous around the Viennese on the street. They looked so normal. But of course they look normal. They're people too, after all. So he's doing self-analysis. He's starting to try to figure out what's going on in this culture around him. Like, what are these? Okay, wait, these people aren't as different as I thought they would be. And that's week 3, so that was actually his first post. He also did a great job of using the mediation to sort of rethink his own thinking and his own actions. I had asked them to talk about, as part of a response to a reading, the groups that they've become part of. And he said, well, guess what? I've been hanging out with Americans. It didn't really start to bother me until I read this article. So the article and what it talked about and the questions that I asked related to that really drew his attention to that fact. And so he realized, okay, wait a minute. Nope, I'm not doing what I should be doing. I should be doing things like reading newspapers, watching TV, hanging out with my language buddy. And then Samantha is my kind of opposite case. She was less ripe. And I'm not saying that Michael made all this progress and Samantha made none, and that, or that he was perfect and she wasn't, but just they really did fall in the extremes. She was a lot less analytical. Her responses were basically almost always emotional, even when I tried to have her take it further. And she also really stayed on the surface of things. I had asked her, she had talked about, we were talking about preconceptions, and I asked her why her grandparents, she said her grandparents thought that people in Spain were lazy, and I asked her to talk more about that. And she says the perception of people being lazy comes from the fact that they don't work and the siesta period during the day. I think people forget how severe the economic crisis is in Spain. That's something she was talking about. In regards to siesta, it's part of the culture. That's all I got from her. And like she, so she recognized it as part of the culture, but she should know by this point that I'm always going to ask, what is it about the culture? Why is that an important part of the culture? How is that reflected in the things that people do and the understandings that they have and so on? But that's just basically, and in the Skype session is where I would then actually say to her, tell me a little bit more about this. And those are being transcribed, and that's part of my data as well. And she also has trouble integrating herself into the host culture and reorienting her behavior. She's talking about interrupting here in week 6. She's like, I just can't get a hold of that part of the culture. I hate interrupting them when they speak. I just wait till they're done, which seems to be forever. So that's week 6. We've talked a little bit more about this. Again, in week 12, this idea comes up. In week 6, that's when we're talking about miscommunication. In week 12, we looked at one page of Kromsch's multilingual social actor. And I said, what is something that's hard for you to do in the culture? Again, she is having trouble. In Spain, people constantly interrupt and talk over each other. It's not seen as rude. It's how conversation works. So she gets that intellectually about the culture. She understands that that's how it works, but I can't find it in myself to interrupt my host mom when she's talking. I still feel so rude, and I'd be lying if I didn't admit that sometimes when people interrupt me, I don't think in my head, how rude. So she just has so much trouble kind of integrating that. I just have one last slide too. So just a couple of concluding remarks. I didn't talk about it here, but the connection between the classroom and their experiences is also a huge part of the mediation that I do with them. So getting them always how to think about how is this going to relate to your students? What might you share? How are you going to share it? Why might you share it? What is it? What are the underlying things about culture that you can tell your students? I talk to them about big C and little c as well, and so getting at those little c ideas. We've had a lot of iterations so far, and some future work potentially looking more closely at the reasons why they're doing, why they respond more than others. And the bottom one is really my life's work, but not my dissertation work, because I don't want to be doing my dissertation forever. But really following the teachers into their field experiences and then potentially into their first years of teaching in order to examine if or how their development of ICC while abroad has any impact on their classroom practice. So that's really what I would like to do in the very end. Thank you.
Michelle, that was wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
I can't imagine having done all those case studies for 4 years. You've been interviewing students one-on-one about their experiences. I think I missed it. How many students are in your case study?
Well, so the one that I'm doing, that my dissertation is focused on, is last year's. There were 12 students who went abroad. This year there's 8. The year before that one, in 2012, there were 11. The year before that, there were 10. So there's roughly 10, 11 kind of each time. We have a small program.
And do they communicate about their experiences in this blog? Do you group them by areas? So all the students in Spain talk about their experience?
They interact all the way across. So we've got German and French students. No, and it's really interesting. And one of the things they tell me that they like the most is seeing other students' experiences in other cultures, because they can see, oh wait, they're having similar experiences, but also they might have a different experience. 2 students in Spain might have different experiences, and they find that really interesting as well, because they're like, oh, wait a minute, everything's not all the same in Spain. I'm in the south, you're in the middle part, and so yeah.
Very interesting. I don't want to
Thanks.
hog you. I'm sure there are other questions.
Thanks. We can talk after.
You have hunches, I can tell. What do you think makes the students more receptive to the mediation?
To be honest, gut right now is it has a lot to do with their personality.
Extroverts?
I'm not sure I would go as far as labeling at that point. Samantha, I have her right now as I supervise student teachers, and she's one of my student teachers that I'm supervising. And many of the things that I saw there are happening now. So, yeah, that's kind of my main hunch.
Thanks, Michelle. That was really great. To follow on with what you just asked about, I was wondering, I think, in the literature I've seen things about the previous experience that one has had with other, it doesn't have to be national culture, but just different kinds of diversity might lead to someone in a study abroad situation being able to build on what they already have. Do you see that, or do you know more about their backgrounds?
That's starting to emerge. I'm noticing that as well. Michael had been abroad before, and Samantha had not, and I've seen it with others in other iterations of the course. I've been noticing that same thing. So that part, there's something there as well, in the experiences that they've had. There definitely, I would say, there's something there.
All right, and then just last question: would you be able to say just a few words about how the course itself has changed, given you've had these 4 years of experience with it?
When it first started, it was just like a 1-credit course, and there were only maybe 4 or 5 times that they responded. Then we increased it to a 3-credit course, added, in that case there weren't any readings or anything like that. Then we added readings, and so we've kind of adjusted the readings in and out. For this time, I've actually taken a couple of the readings out and sort of wanted them to focus more on those inquiry assignments and the things that they can learn from that. Initially, they also did not have to respond. So I respond to them. Initially, they did not have to respond back to what I had said to them, and I felt like so much was being lost because I never got the answers to my questions, and so then I added that, and that has added a lot. I mean, if I could, I would add, let's go back and forth 3 more times, but it's impossible for them and for me, but yeah. Yeah.
We're out of time.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.